Hello, 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 AP Lit World. How are y'all today? Y'all ready to hang out? Let's hang out. I got my coffee. I am good to go. I have my co-teacher. He's not been feeling well lately, so he is sitting close to me today. Oops, sorry about that. See the chain? I'm taking a link off every day as we get closer and closer to the AP Lit exam. I'm Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia. Shout out Grady High School where I work. It's good to be with y'all today. So a couple of shout outs to classes, Mr. Hendricks class at the Hayfield Secondary School. Y'all are watching, hello to you. And also Mr. Lockhead's class from Spokane, Washington, hi to you. And I also just want to mention, I know a lot of the AP Lit classes um, work with Clint Smith's poems and have read his Counting Descent collection. I'm actually wearing my I'm wrapped up in my blanket, my Counting Descent shirt today, but he is going to be on Instagram Live at 2 Eastern reading from his collection because a lot of AP classes have been asking him to Zoom and he wasn't able to handle all of the requests. So he has decided to do this reading today for AP students. So y'all jump on in if you're not busy at 2 Eastern and hear him read. I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Mr. Escobar in Miami. How you doing today, Mr. Escobar?
I'm doing well. And we start with these shout outs every day, and I wanna talk about two in particular because of what they represent for so many people. The first one is Miss um, Ackerman, I think it was, from Lake
Yep,
Norman Christian School.
yep.
And something that struck me about her is that she's a first year AP teacher, and that first year is so difficult for everyone. I remember the first time that I went to be trained to be an AP teacher. I was walking to my car by at the end of the day. This was during an APSI, and I heard Carlos, Carlos, and I look over, and it was a former English teacher of mine who is Miss Krugman. Maybe a lot of you might know Jenny Krugman. She worked for the College Board afterwards. She's just one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met, and she said, "Don't give up. Give it 3 years." And at first I said, why would I give up? Right? Like I'm not wired that way necessarily. And she said, just remember these words. And boy, I tell you, after that first year, I was like, what am I doing? This is so difficult. It was probably worse than being in college, right? And then the second year came around, and it was still tough, but it was more manageable. And something did happen after the third year where I felt like I could do this, right? I got it. I think that I figured out the steps I need to take to get the kids where they need to be. So for all you first year AP teachers, it's always tough, and this year is especially difficult for everyone. But it'll be memorable. How about that? Let's focus on that. But we've all been first year AP teachers. My children do taekwondo, and their Master Jay, always says, what's the difference between a black belt and a white belt? And the answer is, a black belt is a white belt who never gave up.
Hmm.
And I think that's important. Whether this is your first year or your 30th year or your 35th year, we can always learn, and we can always collaborate with one another. So you're not alone, those of you who are first year teachers, and you're not alone, those of you who are 30 and 35-year veterans. We're all in this together for sure. Which brings me to Miss Carr from, was it Castile High School? And Miss Carr is actually retiring. And I want to talk to all the students out there, because we've been talking to the seniors, and we've been talking to the seniors because this is so difficult for you, and many of you feel like you've been robbed, rightfully so, robbed of these experiences. But so have the teachers, right? So have the teachers. So have we won't have a chance, many of us, to say goodbye to you. And we've given so much, and some of us have known you for years and years. And if you think that we're unfazed by this, and if you think that we're not heartbroken, if you don't think that we're not going to bed every night thinking of you guys, then you haven't figured us out. Because God, we leave everything behind in those classrooms for you guys, and not for passing scores, but because of the connections that we make with our students. And I think it's especially difficult for those teachers who are retiring this year because they're not going to get a chance to say goodbye. Um, so hats off to all of you, because I think that you've put in your time, and damn it, you deserve that hug and you deserve that goodbye. And I'm sorry that we're all going through this, but our hearts go out to everyone. But I'm glad that you guys join us every day, and hopefully we forget about some of this stuff in the half hour that we're together. So let's get right to it.
So yesterday we talked about symbolism, and we looked at this excerpt from Cherry Bomb. And we just asked you to think about the symbolism here, what stood out to you. And thinking about this, the object that, and actually there were a couple of different things that you could identify in here that maybe acted as a symbol, but the one that is very obvious and that I chose to think about was the cherry bomb. We see that over and over. It's even the title, so we know that that's going to be important. And then, even though the cherry bomb wasn't actually described, there was description around it. This cherry bomb is kept in a closet behind the back steps. It's in a box of private things from the speaker's private things. And when we see the speaker's response to it, it's associated with this holiday, with the 4th of July, and also with Eddie and Eddie's accident. So then we think, what might this object represent? And actually, the author really is great, because the author directly says it's a memento of good times. And except for Christmas presents, it's the first thing that anyone has ever given him, the speaker. So we know that this character really has this fond memory of it and attachment to it. And so it represents like something from his childhood and these good times and memories. And even the accident, I mean, that wasn't a good time, but he's thinking back fondly on his childhood. And so, what central or controlling idea might this connect to? When we read this story, it's obvious to see that the speaker's looking back in time, thinking, remembering a prior event, and is now looking at it as an adult, as an older person. And so we see this controlling idea and this memory being associated with maturity, again, coming of age, much like the white heron. We saw that in that symbol also of the tree. So that's kind of how all of that fits together. So again, symbols are a way into a text. It is an object that a specific object, a concrete object, but it represents something abstract. And it just helps us to dig into a text and make meaning of it. So today we're going to talk about a narrator, a character, or a speaker's perspective. And let me say, as we finish this, we've been looking at all of these different literary elements, just different parts of literature devices, literary elements. Tomorrow we shift to writing. So we're kind of moving our focus from concentrating on the reading side. And tomorrow we'll be shifting and thinking about all of these literary elements that we've learned about. Now, how can we apply? How can we write about those? So this will be like our last quote reading lesson, but honestly, it all ties together. So character, speakers, narrators, perspective. And again, this ties so closely into some of the other characterization lessons that we've done, because we're wanting to think about the character's background and how does their background and perspective shape the tone that they reveal about the subject, what descriptive words, adjectives, adverbs, what kind of those were, those types of words, what do they convey about their attitude, their perspective about a situation? So When we look at those things, that affects the way that we experience and interpret a text. So that's what we're digging into and looking at today.
And it's all about perspective, right? We hear people use this phrase, but what does it mean? And what does it mean when it comes to literature? Let's start with this. Consider what you're looking at here. Think about size, think about perspective, think about worldview here, and compare it to this, right? Whereas the ladybug seemed tiny in this picture, it's such an obstacle to this ant, right? So massive in size, and yet the ant is so tiny compared to that leaf, let's say, or to the plant, and yet if we switch our perspective yet again, yikes, this is
That's
the ant, right?
terrifying.
Terrifying. Yeah, this takes me back to, what was the movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, right? um so when we shift our perspective, or rather when we try to view the world through the perspective of certain characters, we are going to understand them in a different way, and we can't be passive readers. When we engage with these texts, start looking at the world through the eyes of those characters and see not only what you now can perceive, but try to see how they feel about the things that they're perceiving. And we're gonna practice this today. There's certain questions that we're going to ask ourselves at all times, and we're going to repeat this slide a few times today. We want you to think about what each character considers important, and as a subset of that, what does each character need, and what does each character value? When you get to the heart of that, you're going to be able to assess what they represent for the author, and the purpose or the central idea for that text. We want to look at the dynamics between the characters. How do they treat each other? Are these characters treating each other as if they are on equal footing? Is there a power play? Is there a stratification of placement in society between them? And all these different dynamics will reveal something about the perspective of the character, and thereby we'll be able to understand their motivations, their actions, and their value systems. That, in a nutshell, is the purpose for doing this. Ultimately, when you take each of these characters, you see what they want, what they need, what they value. If you look at how these characters interact with one another, then our interpretation will be enhanced, because we'll be able to talk about the value system that the author is trying to either uh, eh, pr- propose, foment, challenge, qualify, right? What is the social commentary being provided by this passage because of the different perspectives that the characters possess? And this will take us to Pride and Prejudice. And I want us to consider this. The first time I read this novel, the scene that struck me the most, my favorite scene in the novel, is the one I'm going to share with you today. And it's not between Lizzie and Darcy. I'm sorry, those out there, right? It's actually Mr. Collins's marriage proposal, which some of you may have read this. I think there's an AP Lang prompt, if I'm not mistaken, that is capitalizing on this scene, but it's great. So in red, you have the narrator, and then in that purplish color, we have Elizabeth's words, and in green, you have Mr. Collins. To give you some background, Mr. Collins has decided that it is convenient and acceptable for him to marry Elizabeth because, after all, she needs him and he needs a wife. Elizabeth has never thought about Mr. Collins in that way, and she's been struck by someone else at this point, and she there's no way she wants to marry this man, right? So let's see what's going on here. It was absolutely necessary to interrupt him now. Collins is about to propose, or did just propose, and now he's sort of envisioning what their life together will be like and what people are going to say. She had to stop him. You were too hasty. Or do you want to read? You want to read Elizabeth's lines, and I'll read Mr. Collins.
Yeah, let me move
I'll
some.
play the fool here.
I love this scene too. And if you've never seen the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice movie, like this scene in that movie, oh my gosh. Okay. Go ahead, you can start, then I'll jump in for her.
It was absolutely necessary to interrupt him now.
You are too hasty, sir, she cried. You forgot that I have made no answer. Let me do it without further loss of time. Accept my thanks for the compliment you are paying me. I am very sensible to the honor of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than decline
Hmm.
them.
I am not now to learn, replied Mr. Collins with a formal wave of the hand, that it is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept when he first applies for their favor, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar ere long.
Upon my word, sir, cried Elizabeth, your hope is rather an extraordinary one after my declaration. I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies, if such young ladies there are, who are so daring as to risk their happiness and the chance of being asked a second time. I am perfectly serious in my refusal.
Hmm. Yeah, if I were to hear this, I think I'd cry, I'd run away. This is it. But now, Mr. Collins, when I do myself the honor of speaking to you next on this subject, I shall hope to receive a more favorable answer than you have now given me. So clearly, Mr. Collins has not given up, and he has not heard a word that Lizzie has said through this scene. Why do we select this one? Why is it that when we are planning a lesson on perspective, I came to this passage? Well, what they value, what they want is clearly driving what they are saying and how they are behaving towards one another. And we go back to our questions, right? What do they need? What do they value? What does Mr. Collins need? He needs a wife. What does he value? Himself. Right, himself. He values the opinions of others because he's actually thinking that this is going to be a good match because his benefactress is going to approve. um, what is what does Lizzie need? Well, not Mr. Collins. What does she value? Her independence, her her willfulness, her right to choose who she's going to marry and who she's certainly not going to marry. How do they treat each other? And it's interesting because they do treat each other respectfully. All right. She doesn't slap him. She doesn't run out on him. She doesn't demean or debase him, even though he's stubborn and rude. But she says, "Upon my word, sir." And when you read it, you emphasize that,
I
sir.
put the emphasis.
Yeah.
I put the emphasis there, and I was even thinking back to the Peregrine Pickle prompt
All the
with the sir
sirs.
and the
Yeah,
sir. Right,
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
we're following these social norms,
Yeah.
but there's a little attitude there.
Yeah, and within, yeah, absolutely, that's right. Within the parameters of what's acceptable, you can still disagree and argue, but as long as you put "sir," it makes it all okay. And you actually said "sir" the first time you spoke here in this passage too, right? You were too hasty, sir. So we do see that she's holding on to social propriety, as is he. "I am not now to learn," replied Mr. Collins with a formal wave of the hand. That formality says that he's not going to lose his temper. He's not going to lose his hopes or his demeanor, even though his words, I mean, the poor guy looks like such a fool, right? But but there is still some preservation of what's expected by society, and they're treating each other with that degree of respect. What is highlighted? um, what values are highlighted by the interactions of these characters? Well, there's a lot, and I'm not going to answer that question just yet because I want us to look at the next slide. um, let's look at how she speaks here, and she's very, or sorry, let's start with him actually. He is very stuck in his ways, right? He is not listening to what she is saying. Um, he says, it is usual with young ladies. So this guy knows women, right? He's gonna write the book on what's going on in a woman's mind. Um, they secretly mean to accept. I am not discouraged. I hope to lead you to the altar ere long. His entire final statement here, when I do myself the honor of speaking to you next, think about that, right? This man is proposing, and he is going to not listen to what she says, but he's going to try again, and he's going to lead her to the altar. And but she has been so forthright in her response. Accept my thanks for the compliment, the honor of your proposal. I do assure you that I am not one of those ladies. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. There is no animosity, there's respect, but she is very adamant about what her decision is. And he's very adamant that he's not going to care about what her decision is because he has his own agenda. And we have to go, I think, to the first line of this novel to understand, even though this might apply more to Mr. Darcy, right? But it's a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And even though his good fortune is not as good a fortune as Mr. Darcy's, this is what we're seeing from Mr. Collins. He has reached a certain level where it's now expected of him to have a wife. So what is highlighted, what value is highlighted? Well, this obstinacy on the side of this man who needs a wife in order to check a box off, right? It's expected that he has one. Um, After all, what would his congregation think if he's not married, and his benefactress and all these other people who surround him? So, when we talk about what values are highlighted, they don't have to be good values, right? Like this value,
Correct.
in terms of looking for a wife, has nothing to do with love or companionship or making each other better. It's not about that. It's about climbing the social ladder and ticking off boxes. What we want to do now is we want you guys to take this passage, and you're going to work with this passage for homework. So we're not going to give you many answers right now. This is one of the old AP questions, and there's different degrees of servants here, and I think we have to read this one, Miss Barber. I think that there may be some confusion here, but basically you have Wilson, who is on his way to Mr. Carson's house to discuss some issues, and he's going to walk us through the city, and then we're going to meet different servants. So if you want, I'll read the first paragraph.
Okay, sounds good.
Wilson had about 2 miles to walk before he reached Mr. Carson's house, which was almost in the country. The streets were not yet bustling and busy. The shopmen were lazily taking down the shutters, although it was near 8 o'clock, for the day was long enough for the purchases people made in that quarter of the town, while trade was so flat. One or two miserable looking women were settling off on their day's begging expedition, but there were few people abroad. Mr. Carson's was a good house and furnished with disregard to expense. But in addition to lavish expenditure, there was much taste shown, and many articles chosen for their beauty and elegance adorned his rooms. As Wilson passed a window which a housemaid had thrown open, he saw pictures and gilding, at which he was tempted to stop and look, but then he thought it would not be respectful. So he hastened on to the kitchen door. The servant seemed very busy with preparations for breakfast, but good naturedly, though hastily, told him to step in, and they could soon let Mr. Carson know he was there. So he was ushered into a kitchen hung round with glittering tins, where a roaring fire burnt merrily, and where numbers of utensils hung round, at whose nature and use Wilson amused himself by guessing. Meanwhile, the servants bustled to and fro. An outdoor manservant came in for orders and sat down near Wilson. The cook broiled steaks, and the kitchen maid toasted bread and boiled eggs.
The coffee steamed upon the fire, and altogether the odors were mixed and appetizing, that Wilson began to yearn for food to break his fast, which had lasted since dinner the day before. If the servants had known this, they would have willingly given him meat and bread in abundance. But they were like the rest of us, and not feeling hungry themselves, forgot it was possible another might. So Wilson's craving turned to sickness while they chattered on, making the kitchen's free and keen remarks upon the parlor.
How late you were last night, Thomas.
Yes, I was right weary of waiting. They told me to be at the rooms by 12, and there I was. But it was 2 o'clock before they called me.
And did you wait all that time in the street? Asked the housemaid who had done her work for the present and come into the kitchen for a bit of gossip.
My eye is like, you don't think I'm such a fool as to catch my death of cold and let the horses catch their death too, as we should have done if we'd stopped there. No, I put the horses up in the stable and the spread eagle and went myself and got a glass or two by the fire. They're driving a good custom, them, with coachmen. There were 5 of us, and we'd many a quart of ale and gin with to keep out cold.
Mercy on us, Thomas. You'll get a drunkard at last.
If I do, I know whose blame it'll be. It will be Mrs. and not mine. Flesh and blood can't sit to starve to death on a coach box waiting for folks as don't know their own mind.
Servant, semi-upper housemaid, semi-lady's maid, now came down with orders from her mistress.
Thomas, you must ride to the fishmongers and say Mrs. can't give above half a crown a pound for salmon for Tuesday. She's grumbling because trade's so bad, and she'll want the carriage at 3 to go to the lecture, Thomas, at the royal execution, you know.
Aye, I know.
And you'd better all of you mind your P's and Q's, for she's very black this morning. She's got a bad headache.
It's a pity Miss Jenkins is not here to match her. Lord, how she and Mrs. did quarrel, which had got the worst headaches. It was that Miss Jenkins left for. She would not give up having bad headaches, and Mrs. could not abide anyone to have them but herself.
Mrs. will have her breakfast upstairs cooked and the cold porridge as was left yesterday, and put plenty of cream in her coffee, and she thinks there's a roll left, and she would like it well buttered.
So saying, the maid left the kitchen to be ready to attend to the young lady's bell when they chose to ring after their late assembly the night before. So I thought it would be important for us to read it because this is the type of passage that I think some students might give up on before they reach the end. There's so many characters. We're not even clear as to what the action is. We started with this notion of Wilson going to see Mr. Carson. We never see Mr. Carson. Uh, Wilson needed never gets addressed. Never gets. He doesn't get a resolution for it. This is indeed a passage about the different perspectives that we get from these different servants. Wilson, a housemaid, and this servant who's a semi-upper housemaid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have to consider their worldview. Again, what do they need? What do they want? What do they value? How they treat each other. And then we're going to understand what it is that Gaskell is actually the author is saying about society through these characters. We're not going to answer this because you're actually going to write this for homework. And these questions will guide your analysis, and we hope to see great essays because we are going to be talking about writing moving forward. So let's talk about what we did today.
Yeah, today we just considered perspective. What are the different perspectives we see? How do we see that? Through syntax, through diction, through selection of detail, and then how do those perspectives contribute to an overall tone? How do they connect back to a central idea? All of this, every element we've looked at, we identify it, and then we move to the function. Why is it important? Not just can I identify it and find evidence to identify it, but how does that lead us deeper into the text? Why is that important? So identification and function. I feel like we're saying the same things every day, don't
Absolutely.
you?
Yeah, definitely. But it's worth repeating, right?
Correct. So that's what we looked at today. Tonight,
This is the prompt that goes with that passage. The following excerpt is from Elizabeth Gaskell's Mary Barton, a novel of 1848. Remember, use every piece of data you get. A novel about mill workers living in Manchester, England in the 1840s. In this scene, George Wilson, one of the workers, goes to the house of Mr. Carson, the mill owner, to request care for a fellow worker dying of typhus. Read the passage carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Gaskell uses literary elements and techniques to make social commentary. Now, let me say something to the students out there. You're going to write this essay, and we expect a good essay. Okay, we expect you to try your best. We're going to be working with this essay for some of the lessons that are going to come now when we look at writing. Don't just think about perspective. If you've watched more than one of these videos, if you have sat through your teacher's classrooms, then bring everything you've got. We're talking characterization, setting, character perspective, narrative pace, right? uh, what is told when and in which order. Figurative language. Are there metaphors and similes here that really do something remarkable? Look at structure. Look at who speaks. Look at who remains silent. Take all of these to ultimately get at what is the value system, to ultimately be able to answer the prompt.
Mhm.
Social commentary. This is a perfect prompt for everything we've been talking about. Identification, leading to function, leading to a value system. Don't make it just about these workers, make it about society as a whole. What is Gaskell saying? Not about Wilson, not about Mr. Carson, but about you and about me
Mhm.
and about Miss Barber and everyone else out there.
So we'll ask you to write this essay tonight, but the good news is you won't be writing an essay this weekend, right? We'll give you the weekend
Absolutely.
off.
There
So
you go.
yeah. We'll do the heavy lifting today. So tomorrow we shift. We're going to be talking about specifically like how do we gather evidence for our writing and what does that look like? And we'll even talk a little bit just specifically about the format of the test this year. It's going to be online. How does that like our annotating and making notes, what is that going to look like in our gathering evidence and what are some strategies to do that? So that's what we'll be talking about tomorrow. As always, we're just honored to share this time with you and for you to be in our virtual classes. We're learning from all of you as you communicate with us. I'm taking notes the whole time Mr. Escobar is talking. I'm learning a lot from him. So it really is a privilege to share this time with you. If you know of someone who doesn't have a device or access, reach out to College Board, get this information to them. We want to make sure everyone has what they need to take the test. So Bear is signing off today. He's right here. I'm signing off. Looking forward to see you tomorrow. TGIF tomorrow.
That's right. Goodbye, everyone. And I know my students are watching. At least some of them are watching today. I miss you guys. I want nothing more than to be back in room 218 with you guys. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and spend a couple minutes today just reaching out to someone and telling them you love them and telling them thank you because we're all in this together. Bye, guys.